What's up guys, it's Ella. Welcome to my channel whether you are new here or not. Today we are going to be talking about books that made me cry. I think it was Steph Borer who said that sometimes people read to get a good cry, and that's what all of these books did for me. Full disclosure though, I'm a crier. It doesn't take much, okay? So if some of these books you read and you didn't cry, that's fine. I tried to pick ones that people would also probably cry at and that weren't like just deeply personal to me, but you know, it happens, so here we go. Let's talk about books that made me cry. Before we do that, everybody's favorite disclaimer, any noises you hear are him. He's a weirdo, he's always here. Welcome to my channel. Now let's actually talk about why you're here. The first book that made me cry is Almond by Juan Pyeongsong. I really hope I'm saying that correctly. This is a book that was translated from Korean, and it is about a boy who his name is Yoonjae. This book is about a boy named Yoonjae, and he has it's a brain condition called alexithymia. I don't totally know how to pronounce that. It's a medical term, but he has a condition that affects the way some part of his brain grows. He calls them the almonds in his brain, but I think it's really his brain something. I'm clearly more of a reader than I'm an English person, not a science person. Okay? Anyway, I'm a humanities individual. Anyway, in this book, Yoonjae has a condition that makes it harder for him to feel emotions like fear and anger and sadness. And he gets a reputation for this because people think it's weird that he can't cry or feel anger, or like he can't be provoked like most people can. And the beginning is it's split into 3 or 4 parts, and the beginning is just him getting the background of his condition, and he lives with his mom and his grandma who take really, really good care of him and try to make his life as easy and painless as possible. And then there's an act of just random violence, and something happens to his grandma and his mom, and he has to figure out how to adapt in a world where he's, 17 years old, 17, 16, 17. He is now living without the only 2 people who have ever showed him the ropes. And it's so heartbreaking in parts, and it's also so hopeful in other parts, because there's a lot of people who rally around him, and then there's a lot of people who tear him down and really want to tear him down. And it was just a story. The cover says a tender exploration of adolescence, and I hate the word tender, but it is a really good exploration of adolescence and what it means to be different and grow up differently than your peers. This book made me cry out of joy and out of sadness and out of anger, and it was just a really emotional read, and I look back on it very, very fondly. Also, how gorgeous is this cover? I love this cover. So I feel like not enough people talk about this book, so if you haven't picked up this book and you like literary fiction, even if you don't like literary fiction, I'm really picky about my literary fiction books, but this one just evoked a lot of emotion in me, and I can't recommend it enough. The next book that made me cry is Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. This book is about August and Iris. August is a professional basketball player, and one day before a really big game, he meets Iris in a bar, but she already has a boyfriend. She's already taken. And so even though they have this amazing conversation and he just absolutely is enthralled with her, can't have her because she already has a boyfriend. What he doesn't know is that her boyfriend is also a professional basketball player, and when he finds it out, he realizes that they have been rivals on the court for as long as they both have been playing the game. But Iris's boyfriend doesn't treat her very well, and that's putting it incredibly lightly. So then they fast forward a bunch of years. I don't remember how many. They fast forward a bunch of years, and Iris is in a really tricky place in her life. She has things keeping her with her professional basketball player boyfriend, but she also has a lot of reasons to run. So check the trigger warnings for this book. The cover, you'd think like, oh, steamy sports romance. No, this is a very, very emotional read, and I cried a lot of tears of frustration at this book because it's the kind of story that you hear all too often in real life, and you feel trapped for the character. I don't really know how else to explain it. Like, this book made me cry out of frustration more than anything, but I did really enjoy it. Kennedy Ryan's a great writer, and if you haven't picked up this book, definitely do so, but check trigger warnings. The next book is Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. Shocker, I'm talking about this book on my channel again. Everybody talks about this book, but this book is just so worth it. It's so amazing, it's so unbelievable, and I just love it so much. This book is about Macy and Elliot. Macy's mom died when she was young and left a list of things for her dad to do in order to raise Macy the way that her mom would have wanted her to be raised. And one of them is to buy her a place that she can just get away, a house in some location that's far away from the trials of everyday life. So he does that. He buys a lake house, and the people that live next to the lake house live there all year long, but it is Elliot. And so when Macy's first time in her house, she goes into her closet in her bedroom and finds Elliot there reading, because nobody's lived in that house for a while, and that has become his reading spot. This sparks a friendship that spans years and turns into much more than a friendship, until one day, 10 years before the start of this book, something really tragic happens and they don't talk anymore. The part where you find out what happened all those years ago is what made me cry. I think I was so just thrown off guard by it. I was definitely, if you've read Every Summer After, that's the kind of thing I was anticipating happening in this book, and they were different reasons. Anyway, we're not talking about Every Summer After, we're talking about Love and Other Words. These chapters alternate between the past, like, 8 summers ago, not whatever, and then the present, when they're adults and they meet in a coffee shop for the first time in a decade. So it's really emotional. It's a really beautiful love story. I can't think of 2 characters that are more meant to be. Like, they are the definition of soulmates, and I stand by that. So this book, if for some reason all of the hype that it's been getting hasn't caused you to pick it up, let this be your sign. This is for you. Pick up Love and Other Words. The next book is The Lucky Ones by Liz Lawson. This book is young adult, and it's about a school where a school shooting has just taken place, which in itself is an emotional topic. Again, like check trigger warnings. There is a lot of dealing with grief and a lot of dealing with loss, as there is with a book of this sort of topic. There is a romance in this book between someone who lost someone, like a girl who lost someone in the shooting, and the son of the lawyer defending the shooter. So it's a very emotional book, because even though their personalities, they really feel a connection, it's hard because they have this massive life-altering situation standing in between them. Can they get over it? Are you bound to the choices that your family makes? Can you love someone even if you don't agree with the choices their family make? Like, I feel like there's a lot of themes of family and loss and grief, and this book just made me cry. I'll try to insert a picture maybe of me ugly crying to this book, because I did record it. It was bad. I cried so hard at the ending of this book, and I just absolutely adored it, and I don't think enough people talk about it. So The Lucky Ones by Liz Lawson is definitely one that you should pick up if you want a good cry. The next one is one that surprised me by making me cry, and that's Meet Me in Paradise by Libby Hubscher. I've talked about this book before on my channel. It's what I thought was a fun summery romance. I took it on vacation with me. This book is about a girl whose parents died when she and her sister were very young, and she has then been responsible for taking care of her flighty, fun, spontaneous younger sister, and she has always been reliable and stable. She doesn't travel, she doesn't do anything, she doesn't go anywhere, until one day her sister says, please, for me, I want to take a sister trip together, and, she agrees to go. She gets to the airport, and her sister isn't there. Her sister has not arrived to the airport. And she texts her sister, and her sister's like, oh yeah, I'm not coming. So she's now on this trip that was supposed to be a sister trip by herself. Who is there, though, is this grumpy billionaire who is you know, very familiar with the island and agrees to take her there and show her around. So it's like their romance, but the ending really caught me off guard. And I'm not gonna say any more than that because I don't want to. I don't want to spoil it. And you can't say anything about why it made me, I can't say anything about why it made me cry without spoiling it. So this book, trust me on it, I guess, is what I'm asking. The next one is a book that I also took on that trip, and that's Float Plan by Trish Dollar. This book is about Anna. Her fiance recently committed suicide, and she has to deal with that grief, you know, because they were supposed to get married, and he just left her one day. That's the way she sees it. Her fiance Ben was a really big sailor, and she still has access to his boat. And the two had been planning to go on this very long sailing trip for a really long time. And on the day that they were scheduled to leave, Anna decides she's gonna do it herself. However, she quickly realizes that it's a little more than she's cut out for and needs to hire a ship hand named Keane, K-E-A-N-E. I said Keane. She hires him to help her on this ship, and so it's like a story of second chances and love after loss, and just, it's a really beautiful story. I really, really enjoyed it. It's very quick punch to the gut, but I really, really did enjoy this book, and I loved the romance between Anna and Kian. I thought that this book did a really good job at balancing the love Anna had for her fiance and the love that she has for Kian. I think sometimes books, Eleanor and Gray comes to mind, where there's a character dealing with grief and they seem much more in love with the person who has passed than they do with the person that I'm supposed to be rooting for. So I think that this book balances it really well, and I strongly recommend. The next one is fantasy, and it's the Six of Crows Crooked Kingdom duet. These are my favorite fantasy books of all time. Six of Crows did not make me cry, but Crooked Kingdom did. If you have read the books, then you know. This is part of the Grishaverse universe, and basically it's about this ragtag group of 6 individuals who are trying to get something from a place that is very hard to get things from. And that's the gist. This book is really hard to talk about. I feel like there's just so much happening and everything is a spoiler, and it's so fun to just go on this journey of like, what are they gonna do next? What's gonna happen next? And where are they gonna go after this? And then the second book is a completely different thing. So it's just a matter of, you have to read it. You have to read it, but the second book very much made me cry. The next one might be a little bit confusing. I don't know. I don't think so. Beach Read by Emily Henry. So this is my favorite book of all time. This is my favorite romance of all time, but I don't talk about it that much on this channel because who hasn't heard of / read Beach Read? But this is my favorite book of all time. What made me cry? Okay, I'll tell you the synopsis very briefly in case you somehow haven't heard of Beach Read. Basically, January and Augustus went to college together and they were both writers, but they didn't really get along in college. One day, January's dad passes away and she has to go to this house that she didn't know her dad had, where he had an entirely different life than the one he had with her and her mom. She goes to stay at this house because she's kind of in a writing slump and doesn't really have anywhere else to go. And who's her next door neighbor but her college nemesis, Augustus Everett. They then make this bet that January's a romance writer and Augustus writes literary fiction, and in their, battle of wits or their rivalry, they think that the other person couldn't write their genre. So they make a bet. Augustus writes romance and January writes literary fiction. That's how that went. So they decide that that's what they're going to do, and they make a bet. What got me was the themes of grief in this book and the letters. And that's all I'm going to say for people who haven't read this book. But for people who have, you know what I mean by the letters. And I bawled my little Ella eyes out. The next book that I cried at is 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. If you've read this book and you didn't cry, I question your emotional depth. That's not fair. That's not a fair statement. What I'm trying to say is that this book is incredibly emotional. It is written with the intention of being incredibly emotional. It is a childhood friends to lovers story about two characters that have a really strong connection. It's Poppy and Rune. Rune and Poppy have this really strong connection. They grew up as next door neighbors until Rune has to move very far away and Poppy just stops talking to him. So when he comes back after being far away for so long, he's really hurt because he really loved her and he thought that she really loved him, and then she just ghosted him. You soon find out that there is a very good reason why Rune ghosted her, and they kind of go from there. This is a very emotional story. I cried from like the first page on and just like continued crying the whole book. So this book is made to be emotional. It is intentionally emotional. And if you are looking for a good cry, here you go. And the last book that made me cry is Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. I read this book forever ago and just absolutely adored it. Basically, Claudia has a best friend named Monday. They grew up together and they're basically sisters at this point. And one day, Monday doesn't show up for school. And then Monday continues to not show up for school, and Claudia doesn't know what happened to her best friend, and she's shouting into the void, like talking to adults, and she's like just yelling for anyone to look for Monday. Where's Monday? What happened to Monday? And nobody will tell her anything, and nobody seems that concerned with looking for Monday. So it is a very, very heartbreaking story of like friendship, and again, loss and just frustration. So this book really took me for a turn. I cried out of frustration and I cried tears of sadness for Claudia. So if this is just a really emotional book, but I think it's one that a lot of people need to read after checking trigger warnings. There you go, guys. There's 10 books that made me cry. I feel like I could do more of these because, like I said, I'm a crier, but for now we'll stick with these 10. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I will see you when I see you. Bye, guys.